Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gooey's Dungeon Dive, the show where I rank all of the dungeons in the Legend of Zelda series. I'm Gooey, and joined, as always, this season by my special Wind Waker correspondent, Corey Richmond. How's it going, Corey?
It's going good.
And after restoring the power to the Master Sword, we have one final task before we confront Ganondorf, which is reuniting the pieces of the Triforce of Courage. This is a notorious quest, and it has the player collecting 8 shards of the Triforce of Courage that are scattered across the Great Sea. There has been discussion over the years on this quest, and, criticisms raised to it. People have called this quest at times long or tedious, but we're going to take a closer look and see what could or couldn't be going on here. Is there an issue? What's going on? We're gonna get into it.
We're gonna get to the bottom of it.
One thing people criticize it for is the length of the quest, which they actually cut down in the remake, as we were discussing. Originally, you would have to go around and find a chart corresponding with each Triforce shard, have it translated by Tingle for an outrageous price, and then you'd have to find and salvage each shard. The chart translation themselves would often inflate the time, as players also would have to go, acquire enough rupees to have each chart translated.
Back in the day, back in ye old Wind Waker original times, I don't remember having any problems with the length or anything. The one thing that did bother me back then was Tingle. That's pretty much the main thing that I think a lot of people like about the HD version, is that they changed it so that instead of all 8 shards having charts that you need to get deciphered by Tingle for a lot of money, only 3 of them in the HD version have charts that need to get deciphered. That's actually something that I really like about it, is going and fishing them up from a random spot in the overworld, because that feels like very, very real almost.
I personally think the amount that you have to do to complete the quest itself it's not inherently an issue. Of course, if you reach this point in the game that we're talking about the quest right now, and you haven't collected any of them, you do have quite a bit on your plate, and of course the rupees. But I think part of the beauty of this quest is it's teased and can begin much earlier on in the game. I've mentioned this before. At this point in the game, actually, I mentioned last time we were out sailing that I had already collected all but 2 of the shards. Mm-hmm. So I actually didn't even really play a lot in this section of the game. Of course, not everyone's going to do that, but I was actually thinking, if we went back and maybe used this episode to do a little recap on just the sailing overall and talk about, the sailing in the game, I think it ties in kind of nicely with the Triforce Shard quest,
Yeah, for sure.
I have kind of a recap that I wanted to run through, actually, of how the game unlocks.
Go for it.
If you don't mind.
Yeah.
Because I have sort of a thesis that I was sort of planting seeds for. It's kind of it's not maybe thesis is a strong term. It's more of a, sort of a suggestion, or maybe a thought on why it can come off poorly. And I've kind of already stated it, but let's go back. Let's rewind a little bit.
Take notes, people. Gooey's going to tell you the way to play this game.
Our first sea section, we're not really a part of. It almost doesn't count, but of course we ride the pirate ship to Forsaken Fortress. Then our second sailing portion is that straight shot from Windfall to Dragon Roost, and I've discussed how it kind of makes sense. We can't change the wind. Wind is blowing one way. The sail can go one way. I think that makes sense. And there's some teases from stuff. There, the little samples. We talk about how they give you samples of everything you can really do. But if you recall back in episode 5, that's when I did my big spiel about how the overworld of the Great Sea unlocks, and how I didn't like the portion
complete with diagrams.
I had my diagrams about how I did not like the portion between Dragon Roost Island and Forest Haven. Okay, so that, and I was kind of, my thesis at the time, and it still kind of is that that kind of starts to hamper people's desire to explore a little bit. Where at least it does for me, where it's well, shoot, I might as well just go to where I'm going, because you're kind of blocked off. After that, episode 7, after we complete the Forbidden Woods, the Great Sea opens up and can be explored, you know, pretty much entirely. Obviously, there's it's a bit more of a pain. There's no warping at this point because we haven't gotten the bow and arrow, which I think actually that's part of my thesis, is that not being able to warp does make it sort of like, do you really want to go out of your way to like search for certain things? Because then you're like way off course, you know. My memory of playing this game when I was younger is really kind of like this part, even though it is more free, kind of feeling railroaded, because I'm like, well, I'll get things on the way to the next destination, and then it's the whole endless night thing. It does feel a little bit railroady, but if I'm giving it credit, you know, and you go back to that episode, I did a crap load of stuff in that part of the game. But I will say, in that part, you first get the Triforce teased to you by the fishmen, you know, the whole Triumph Forks thing. And you can start finding charts, and in that portion, I remember getting 3 charts translated by Tingle. I got the money and everything, and I got 3 shards, so that early in the game you can get them. But like I do feel like I'm sort of an edge case in that situation, and I think the game actually, up until that point, almost does kind of train you to like not fully explore as much as you could. But in the next portion, after Tower of the Gods, we can gain the ability to warp. I think the idea of collection becomes more appealing, and that's actually, I remember I went back, and that's where you said you did a lot of overworld exploring once you got the bow. But it's not until after completing the Forsaken Fortress and revealing Princess Zelda's identity where the King of Red Lions more explicitly tells us of the Triforce and how we should seek the pieces out, and Tingle sends us that super expensive letter that we discussed containing the incredible chart to help guide us. And that's also the section where you can get all but 2 shards, like I mentioned. Personally, I found the way that sort of unfolds in the game, and up until that point, before you've beaten the last 2 dungeons we even talked about, to be able to get that stuff, I thought that's pretty nice. And I think it might have been cooler if it was maybe even peppered more evenly throughout the game, you know? Maybe finding some charts even earlier. This is my light suggestion. It's not even a thesis, you know? I don't have any charts or diagrams, but, you know, maybe if you could find some stuff earlier, maybe that strange sailing segment that I mentioned was tweaked, and maybe if you got the, you know, like now a game like Breath of the Wild, you know, gives you the ability to warp like much sooner. Obviously it would be different than presented in the game, but you know, this would maybe make it an even more appealing quest in the game, and you could even have kept, I think actually you could have kept in more of the charts that they had in the original game. I think then it would have made that sort of quest sort of another fun, like sort of ongoing large quest, kind of like how you get in Breath of the Wild. You'll get these couple main quests that kind of intersect, they kind of don't, you know what I mean? But you can kind of do them at your own pace.
I think you're teased pretty early. I wouldn't want them to tease it much earlier. I think it's like the point that they do it at, especially in this playthrough, I realized so much more than ever before how much it really is hinted at to you in the game. Like through the fishmen, through the King of Red Lions, through, even if you're just exploring naturally, you can easily, without hints, stumble upon a Triforce shard. There's definitely something about it that I think makes players kind of forget they can start doing it, because I think that is kind of what one of the common complaints I hear is that like it all feels sort of lumped on you at the end, and it's just a lot, and it's tedious, and it takes too long. And I don't really feel that way, but I can understand why if someone's not paying attention to all this stuff, or if they're not going out of their way to explore and, you know, try and start picking at this knot that they're being hinted at. I can understand why they might be like, why are you telling me to do all of this right now after I did these dungeons right before the climax of the game, you know?
That's why I brought up that sailing portion, because I feel like, I think people would feel differently about the sailing if they weren't thinking like, oh, I gotta get to where I'm going, like get to the next part, you know, a lot in the game. And instead, if it was like, maybe you couldn't go everywhere, but like more parts were a little bit more accessible and you could like warp around a little bit easier earlier on, especially when you can access the full sea, I think people would associate more with like, man, this game is cool. Like I went over here and I found a Triforce shard, like, you know, after Tower of the Gods, you know, but I think people like you can, but I think people just don't see it or appreciate it because the game does kind of...
It says keep going. My 3 favorite Legend of Zelda games are Wind Waker, Breath of the Wild, and A Link Between Worlds. All games where considerably, especially in comparison to other Legend of Zelda games, you have comparatively more freedom. It opens up and it gives you the possibility of going to at least explore, if not complete, several other things in different orders that you want to. I appreciate that, you know, you're starting to have those feelings, especially in this playthrough, because like that's what I've been feeling ever since I've played this game when I was like 7 or 8 years old or whatever. When I had the option, regardless of if I could warp, regardless of if Cyclos was getting in my way or whatever, I would see a little speck in the distance and be like, ooh, what's that? It's like a new island or something. Let me go explore that and see what I can do there. And that was basically the driving factor for me enjoying the game. And then like all the cool story stuff is what I did after I was done exhausting my exploration.
And not to mention, like, this part of the game, like, it's a nice variety of things to do, I think, to collect the Triforce shards. If we're just purely talking about the chart to shard thing, I like, you know, going and scooping them up. That's fun. But then all those other tasks that you have to do to get there, or to get the shard in the remake, they're all pretty fun. It reminds me a little bit of like doing a shrine in Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
But like a little bit more unique because there's a lot less. But you know.
I appreciated the way that they incorporated it into the game. Like the ghost ship you just mentioned. That's completely different from all the other ones pretty much, because you have to go to an island and then it's like a spooky, specifically themed area with like a little jar pot maze thing to get like a unique chart specifically that tells you, okay, this ship, which it's possible you've encountered it before just randomly, but it tells you, okay, this ship is gonna be in this spot when the moon is in this phase, and then you can enter it. And it's like one of the submarines, but it's like there's spooky mist and there's ghosty enemies.
Yeah.
This might just be like the lore appreciating nerd in me, but even besides the gameplay variety that it provides, I really like thinking about, in the backstory of this game, the Triforce of Courage was split apart into 8 shards, and basically they're all hidden, scattered throughout the land of Hyrule because there is no hero. Makes you think, like, why is there a piece of this omnipotent golden power hidden in the basement of some rich family's vacation house? And some of them are just like thrown about, scattered on the sea floor. One of the charts is heavily protected on like a super heavily armored island that's, you know, surrounded by cannons and boats and enemies and stuff. And it feels kind of innocuous. It feels like just they picked 8 random spots to put these random things, but it makes me think probably more than it should, but I like that about it too. I like that the Bird's Peak Rock one makes you use the Highway pair, which is like just a random item that like you don't really have any reason to use besides that. This is such a good excuse to explore the rest of the Great Sea if you haven't already, but what I love about it is that you can forge it out in your own way. Even if I leave everything to the very end, even if I don't get any of the charts or shards until after I beat all the dungeons, then I still like that idea of being like, of sort of routing out my path, of being like, alright, it makes me feel like a seafaring adventurer. Because I look at the incredible chart and I'm like, okay, looks like there's a chart over here, and there's a shard over here, so I'm gonna do this little loop in the northeast quadrant, hit these islands up, and then it looks like there's one in the southwest, so I'm gonna go hit Tingle up on my way over there, and then get that one, and then I'm gonna fish them up. As fantastical as this game is, like, that feels kind of realistic for someone that's searching for sunken treasure.
No, I 100% agree with you. I sort of just wish the game, I'm more thinking of like, just give me those tools early on. I always think the fact that you can start getting stuff before you're explicitly told to actually be a plus. It's more of just like the, you know, man, I wish I could just start warping around and, or at least warp to where I've been, you know, that type of thing. You know, that's kind of minor, more quality of life things. I thought this was funny, but once you get all the pieces, you see that thing light up in the inventory. They pull up the inventory screen and they show it shining. I'm like, hell yeah. Most intense inventory scene in any Zelda game, I think. And when we return to the Tower of the Gods, we see that thing light up on our hand. And this proves that we are the true hero, and the King of Red Lions bestows upon us the title Hero of Winds. Classic moment.
Love it. The Triforce piece dwells within
Beautiful
you
stuff.
now.
We head down. We got to return below Hyrule to aid Princess Zelda. Down in the Master Sword Chamber, beneath the surface, we see Zelda zapped right out of there by Ganondorf. He's fully regained his power, and he sicks some dark nuts on us. We got this flame-circled arena that we have to do battle with some dark nuts. You know, it's no big deal, but it's a pretty cool scene. I have started to realize once they're like, we need an epic battle moment. Okay, Dark Nut Arena. But once they're dispatched, we can head outside, and with the power of the Triforce on our side, we shatter that big barrier blocking us from the rest of Hyrule. Pretty cool moment. I like, though it is kind of a funny glass shattering sound effect they go with. We could then take the path that leads right up to a cave that'll put us at the base of our final dungeon, which is Ganon's Tower. Pretty excited. So we've got our final dungeon and our final episode coming. And we'll be able to get, you know, we'll dive deeper into our overall thoughts on the dungeons. Though you touched on something interesting in this, which is that, and we'll talk about it more in the next episode, but I think it ties into this episode pretty well. You talked about how, you know, a lot of that, the big overworld collection, you know, it feels like most of the game, but according to the dungeons, it's actually pretty late in the game. And I think that's some food for thought is, you know, well, maybe, you know, what's the dungeon situation here? The amount of dungeons is something we've talked about. So, maybe we'll get into that a little bit more in the next episode. But then, of course, we'll be wrapping up talking about the story, which we've had, you know, too much development on that in this episode, but there'll be a lot of stuff to touch on. Obviously, there's some things, but, I'm excited to get to the story, to wrap up the dungeons, and to wrap up this game. It's been quite the journey. Corey, thanks for joining me, and we'll see everybody in Ganon's Tower.